Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us to this guest lecture given by Associate Professor Juho Lindman from University of Gothenburg. Juho, welcome to our university. We are very happy that you are here. And thank you for giving us a presentation on the topic of public governance of the related to the blockchains. I'm Gabriel Laatikainen. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Jyväskylä. And I would like to give the floor to Juho. And Juho, first, please tell us about yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. Is the mic on? Yeah. Good. So welcome everybody to the session, and welcome also to the people joining us from Zoom. So as we have practiced these hybrid sessions for a while now, so if something goes wrong with the technology, somebody drops offline or we drop offline, don't panic, just stay there. We'll be right back, or you can try to join immediately back in there. Also, since it's Zoom, it's possible to write comments, I think at least, and we will collect those comments and kind of address them as we kind of proceed with the talk. So first of all, I would like to thank for the very kind invitation to give this talk. It is a presentation of my research, roughly, of myself, of my research group, and of course, a little bit going deeper into my previous research that I've done with the OECD, and specifically with the uncertain promise of blockchain for governments. And so first of all, I'm Juho Lindman, and as you might hear from my accent, I'm originally from Finland. So I moved to Sweden 7 years ago. I'm associate professor of informatics in the University of Gothenburg. Department is applied IT, and the division is informatics. I'm also the director of our blockchain lab there, which is not as fancy as this one in here, but kind of more like a virtual group of people interested around blockchain topics. I'll say a few words about that in my talk. And I've given a number of talks around this area and from this report, and I've always tried to kind of little bit direct it to their audience. So I'm kind of quite happy to, if you want to know more about that particular research or some part of it, I'm quite happy to kind of tell a lot more. So I've prepared slides, I think it's like 30 or 40 minutes, and then it's open for questions. And of course, since this is my own research topic, I could talk for hours, but we'll try to kind of say something meaningful, so to make good use of your time and mine. So first, some words about myself. So I've been now in Sweden almost 7 years. Originally, I defended my doctoral thesis in 2011 in the Aalto School of Business. Back then, I was looking at open source software production and how it changes organizations, specifically related to software production in organizations. And after my dissertation in 2011, I moved across the street to Hanken, the Swedish-speaking business school in Helsinki, where I was looking into open access and open data related issues. And then I managed to get a tenure track position in 2016, and then I moved to Sweden at that point. And when I moved to Sweden, at that point, I also started to look more closely into blockchain. And for some, it might feel like a very big jump from open source software or from open data to blockchain related topics, but I don't actually think it is so big jump. Many of the public blockchains are, of course, at their core open source software products, kind of projects, and they kind of, at least in the history, they used to be run as such. So at the first, when I was looking at blockchains, I was more kind of applying those open source related theories and things that we had learned from open source to this new area of open source projects. But as it kind of grew, I increasingly moved towards blockchain. And probably it's relatively safe to say that for the previous, I'd say at least 3 to 4 years, I've been primarily looking into blockchain related topics. And I've been a little bit of a wandering academic, so I've kind of not only here in Jyväskylä, which I'm very grateful for providing this opportunity, I've also moved a little bit in earlier stages of my research career, mainly in the US and in UK. So I had small or short visits to Scancor at Stanford University, and then a little bit longer in 2019 in the Weatherhead Center at Harvard University. And that's also the time I started to put this together. So this kind of this report kind of coincides my time in Massachusetts quite nicely. So GU Blockchain Lab is kind of educational and research initiative, and it's primarily consists of basically 3 people. So me, Livia Nordström, who was my postdoc for 2 years, now works at University West, but kind of we worked quite closely in blockchain related topics. And then my doctoral student, Mikael Lindqvist, who is currently doing his doctoral thesis, and his doctoral thesis data gathering happens in Bolagsverket, one of the bigger Swedish blockchain projects that is now ongoing. So he's collecting data from that one. In total, at the blockchain lab, we basically most of the research activity is kind of focused around 2 projects that we have: blockchain in government, or BLING, and Strong House, which is blockchain usage for green renovation activities. And basically, there's a number of researchers who kind of somehow are a little bit affiliated with the lab, but are not kind of, I would say, really at the core of doing things. So their primary research focus is not related directly to blockchain, but they have been contributing to the projects. And then there's a number of students who are, most of them are actually now in the thesis stages of their work, and hopefully in the upcoming weeks will be finalized with a number of those theses. I also put some slides just because I don't know how familiar people are with the setting here. So first of all, University of Gothenburg, it's on the west coast of Sweden, so Atlantic, as like we used to call it. It's not actually in the Atlantic Ocean, but pretty close anyway. So it's on the western coast. And it's quite big. So in terms of the university, we have all the faculties, including a business school and a big medical school. So in total, I think we are about 47 or 48,000 students and 6,000 employees, which makes it, in terms of student population, or one of the bigger universities in the Nordics. I think Copenhagen is still a little bit bigger. We used to kind of sometimes have a match with them. Stockholm university is not really so big because they don't have everything under the same roof. They have their own business schools and medical school and technical schools kind of outside the university. Which means that it's quite big in terms of its as the overall university, but of course, where we are situated at the Department of Applied IT, it's not as big. So we're basically 4 divisions, and the division of informatics is roughly 80% of the people kind of located in the Department of Applied IT. But we also have a division of learning, communication, and IT, division of cognition and communication, and a division of human-computer interaction inside the same department. And then we call the information systems part of this informatique for some reason, or informatics in English, which in many of the other countries means closer to the library science, but in Sweden is kind of closer to information systems. And this is kind of how we kind of usually tell the story here. It's one of the so our division of information systems is one of the powerhouses of the Swedish information systems research. Kind of, and the other big departments around information systems are located Umeå, Stockholm School of Economics, Uppsala, and Lund, and a few of the other ones in terms of information systems. But we are one of the bigger ones, and I would say one of the more interesting ones for sure. So we also kind of have this thing called Swedish Center for Digital Innovation, which is a research center that is formed by 3 universities. So it's us, Umeå from the north, and then Stockholm School of Economics. And this kind of allows us to be kind of a little bit combine our forces and try to do a little bit bigger terms in terms of IS. Most of the SCDI activities are focused on the public sector side. So not like all our research is there, but a lot of the activities, specifically SCDI, is looking into public sector contexts. And our kind of blockchain lab is situated under this research center. So it's kind of how it's basically organized. And there's a lot to be said about the public sector focus, but one of the reasons for that is that Sweden traditionally, not only in information systems, but a number of other disciplines, has this quite strong research in public sector area. And if I was a little bit critical, even though there might be a lot of research, that doesn't always mean that many of the public sector agencies as such would be super developed in terms of their digital infrastructures, but at least there's a lot of tradition around looking into public sector actors. And then I already kind of mentioned the SCDI, which is kind of our more like a overall like a umbrella organization that we belong to. And then the blockchain lab. So we are kind of, I would say 3 to 4 years old. Primarily, our work so far happens primarily in those external projects. So the blockchain and governance project and Interact project, and then Stronghouse, which is another Interact project. I have some slides on this, but I'm not really going to go into much detail because I don't think this is super relevant for our purposes. What we do basically is kind of easily divided into two groups. So one has to do with organizing the research project around it. So with this, there's a blockchain and government project. This kind of ends actually at the end of this year. It was originally a 3-year project. It's extended with another with 1 year because of the COVID pandemic. And the main purpose of the blockchain government, I'll say a few more words about that because that's, I think, one of the most relevant research projects in terms of kind of what I've been doing for the last years. Stronghouse has to do more with the providing a blockchain-based solution for green lending, specifically for the bond market. And that will also kind of end towards this year. Most of my research part is kind of going on the fourth one of this. So the OECD report on the uncertain promise of blockchain for government. I'll come back to that in a while. In terms of teaching, there's of course a number of our own programs, and namely the bachelor program in Systemsvetenskap, and then our master's flagship program around digital leadership, where we have been involved. And of course, with blockchain, there's a lot of guest talks. So I've been kind of given a lot of guest lectures to different kinds of programs inside GU, inside Sweden, but also internationally around public sector uses of blockchain. And then I'll kind of mention a few of the collaborations. I haven't really listed all of them, but we have quite good place in Swedish public sector blockchain space, I would say. So because of our earlier work. So that's a little bit too small. Anyway, so this basically just an introduction to blockchain and governance projects. So that's Interact funded. So 6 countries, 13 partners, 5 million budgets, 50% co-funding it. Then it was our part of this was in terms of the total it was kind of over the 4 years. It was around so in euros around 600,000 euros, this one. And it's led by Groningen from the Netherlands as the coordinator, and then consists of, and this is of course for us the interesting part, number of public sector organizations all over these countries. So from the Netherlands and Belgium, also Denmark, Norway, and some from Scotland. And I don't know if you're kind of familiar with the Interreg kind of area rules. So that's kind of at least for us, was a little bit of a hassle to figure out sometimes. So So this is the North Sea, which means that it kind of doesn't really consist fully of those countries. So it's only part of the universities of those specific countries. So in this case, it's like the coast of Norway, the west coast of Sweden, not like then the kind of the west coast of Denmark, not including Copenhagen, northern Germany, not including Berlin, northern Belgium, not including Brussels, northern Netherlands, and then on the UK side, on the eastern coast, not including London, but most of Scotland. So a little bit kind of weird way of setting up the kind of area, but it is what it is. And for us, in the project, so it's of course has to do with a lot of our earlier research around blockchain technology, but also more generally digital innovation on the public sector side, and especially research on emerging technologies such as blockchain in our case. So that is roughly kind of the institutional setup I am from and I am working in, and then I've prepared a kind of a little bit more in-depth dive into some of my more recent work. And that is basically the OECD working paper number 43, also called The Uncertain Promise of Blockchain for Government. And this kind of started with OPSI, part of OECD, that's looking into public sector innovation, looking into finding an external consultant to work with them on a blockchain report. And they kind of published this publicly, and I kind of thought that our research group should go for it. And we applied, and this was at the time I was kind of on my mini sabbatical, and we kind of got it through the competition. And then after that, we, or primarily I, worked on this from end of 2019 to the beginning of 2020. And then just when we were scheduled to hit the more intensive data collection period, COVID pandemic happened. So a lot of the data gathering in exotic places turned into more like a desk research and Zoom sessions. But then again, may allowed us to do this a little bit different way also. So not only that thing. And at the end of 2020, we released this report. So I'm the primary author and it has also 3 OECD staff scientists as the authors. And this whole thing is available on the digital library of OECD. So if you become interested on any of the topics, please have a look at the actual report that contains like a lot longer discussions, and also we used quite a lot of references, so a lot of those too. It's not super technical though, so because one of the reasons is that, I'm not sure, are you familiar with the OECD reports, but they have this kind of publishing rule that any OECD report should be approachable in a way that if a public sector decision maker sees an OECD report somewhere, that they can just pick it up and start reading, and they will kind of immediately understand what is being talked about. So it's kind of written in a relatively approachable format. And this working paper is in a working paper series. It's also part of OECD's blockchain papers series. So it's in a number of their publication series. And it ultimately came out on the 19th of October around the OECD Global Blockchain Policy Forum event in Paris, and virtually, unfortunately. I got some feedback on it. I'll come back to that. So before we go there, maybe it's worthwhile to kind of say a few words about kind of the institutional setup for this. So OECD has had 2 earlier different kinds of reports around blockchain, actually more if you look at like through all of them, it's mentioned in a number of places, but 2 kind of that I think are quite interesting. And OPSI is only part of OECD. So OPSI is a kind of a public sector innovation part of OECD. Inside OECD, you have a number of other kind of organizations and and institutions and so on. So they released 2018 working paper on blockchains unchained, which is kind of an introduction to the technology to public sector decision makers. And they had 2019 kind of follow up on that on digital government and open data unit that they have looking into use of emerging technologies in the public sector. And this is not only blockchain, so it is half blockchain, half AI. So they kind of grouped emerging technologies together for that particular one. And then they've had a number of other ones. Also, after my report, a number of OECD papers have been published that merit something. And these are working papers, so these are not really scientific papers. So there's a kind of the references are used, but the style is quite, I would say, chatty, and it has this kind of a little bit of a consultancy angle. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. The primary audience for many of the OECD reports is public sector decision makers. So that's it. They're kind of written from that perspective. What do we say in the report? Well, this is basically my most important slide. And before I kind of go into detail in those, it's probably, if you haven't followed up the OECD debates around blockchain, it's as many debates over blockchain, it's a little bit polarized, to put it lightly. So there are basically several camps where some are super critical towards technology and some are, I would say, quite enthusiastic about the technology. And it has been for like that for a while. So it's kind of, so that is kind of in there. And that's not the only community that has this kind of discussion, but it kind of maybe helps to understand a little bit where it's kind of coming from. So in the material that we gathered 19 and 20, we still kind of, and this is kind of, I guess, kind of the core. So still, if you look at actual users of these systems, it's rather limited. And this is a claim that we have kind of now revisited after publishing this actually quite a lot. But especially if you're looking at systems that have gotten actual users, systems that have caused changes in organizations, or systems that have actually built a large user bases on the public sector side, we couldn't really find many of those at least. And then we kind of, what we did in the report is that we kind of collected the kind of the state of the art of the literature, roughly at least at that point. And then we looked at the hype, like how to think about the hype, whether there is hype or is not hype. There is hype, unsurprisingly. And we kind of visited some of the early success stories related to blockchain to see kind of where they are and how they have moved forward. And not everybody liked what we did here. So we say that there's still a lack of some of the clear use cases. And then what is I think our main contribution is that kind of keep monitoring this space, because we are expecting some of these pilots to kind of grow into maturity and to be able to scale up. So this is basically kind of the two messages we wanted to kind of put forward. So how the report, I'm not going to go through the full report. If you want to talk about something specific in there, it's possible. So what we did in here is that kind of we tried to provide an overview of the current situation, and we wanted to discuss specifically kind of the viability of that. I was kind of borrowed from the AI sphere a little bit. Then we talked about literature on kind of definition of public sector, and we framed it as a kind of 10 moods about blockchain in the public sector. Then there is a more kind of empirical part that we divided into two different chapters, chapters 3 and chapter number 4. So we wanted to kind of have an eye on what is often discussed when we're discussing blockchain project success and non-success, like what kind of factors, what kind of things can we see from the earlier literature, and what kind of emerged from at least the pilots that we looked into. And then there's another area of this, so not looking at the success of individual projects or services, but looking into organizations that are launching these services. So another type of success, so organizational success of a blockchain, related to blockchain organizations. And this chapter number 4, we've carried out now kind of a little bit of work around, empirical work around this, kind of organized workshop discussed with blockchain stakeholders and so on, to kind of understand how the organizations look at this. But this was also an area where OECD, as you probably know, has a lot of ongoing research already. So they have released a number of different kinds of frameworks to measure digital maturity of ecosystems and also countries. And that's often quite widely publicized when they kind of release this kind of country metrics, like how are countries doing against each other. And those are quite useful often for public sector decision makers to kind of a little bit benchmark on countries against other countries. So OECD kind of has that kinds of things and metrics in place a little bit. But the thing with it is that these kind of emerging technologies don't really show up often in those metrics, not at least very clearly. So they were, of course, an organization super interested to understand how could they better capture these emerging technologies in their measurements of countries and ecosystems. And that's the chapter number 4 is also something that where OECD did a number, OECD staff science did a number of important work. And then we tried to conclude it a little bit. So what is in the report then? So it's based on the kind of the case studies of some of the early pilots that we looked into. It's based on secondary data that we were able to collect, especially kind of related to some of the kind of the more successful projects that we found. It has some primary longitudinal data on those that we kind of were able to already monitor as this data collection was going on. And it, of course, actually, and maybe not so surprisingly, led into kind of, we often found ourselves not really talking so much about blockchain, but actually more about the government part of the thesis. And this, of course, also poses us a few problems. So kind of how to move from this kind of more consultancy-oriented data gathering to turning this into an IS paper. What kind of data collection, additional data collection is needed? What kind of additional things are needed to kind of publish on this? So in the report, and this is kind of what was kind of roughly borrowed one. So kind of and this is a little bit consultancy-wise kind of take on this. But what we were kind of trying to say in the chapter number 1 is that blockchain pilots roughly can be divided into 3 different groups. And the minimal is the viable version, meaning that blockchain technology can be used to solve a specific business kind of need. Now, what we are trying to communicate in this chapter is that this is not enough. So it's not enough that you can use blockchain for a specific public sector need. It needs to kind of bring something more than some of the other solutions. So that's the second step, valuable. So using blockchain to a public sector need is valuable in that particular setting. And then there's the third group of blockchain, the most important ones, the vital ones, meaning that solution that only can be solved with blockchain technology. And with the report, we want to push it up from the kind of viable to the more valuable, and looking into are there kind of actual blockchain pilots that can only be solved through the use of blockchain. And this one seems to be difficult to do. So in many of the cases that we look through the blockchain implementations, you could find other technologies that might solve similar needs. Not always though, but in many cases. And in those cases that the technologies could solve the same system, same solution as the blockchain technology, you could still see that, okay, but arguing why the blockchain technology might be better for this particular need was not trivial. For example, you could say that it's a little bit better logging technology, or a little bit more transparent voting technology, or so kind of a really kind of these kind of use cases was what we were kind of hoping to find with our efforts, but maybe we fall a little bit short, at least on the public sector side.
I have a question.
Yeah, do we need a mic or?
So I like this, but I'm confused because, of course, I'm a big fan of blockchain. But blockchain is a technology, and here we have narrowed the whole world to blockchain, and now we have containers in software development. So we would say, is your proposed implementation unworkable without containers? Or so, what's your, because I mean it's really blockchain has a lot of promise, but is this almost too much technology bound? Because it is still just technology.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I don't have a very good answer, but I have a start of an answer, or maybe the start of two answers. So one has to do with the level of ambition. So one has to do that blockchain is often discussed in terms that it will be radically different and it will be very disruptive in terms. And that's, of course, not all blockchain applications or kind of solutions are like that. So it kind of sets the bar quite high if we are able to use blockchain, for example, to provide a tracking or a logging system. That might be better, but it's not really changing everything in the kind of the system. So there's this kind of question of like kind of answering an ambition. And then there's a second issue, which is like, how much blockchain do you need to have in order it to be a blockchain project? So you have a kind of often a stack of technologies that might go together, and only one of the small parts of that being kind of blockchain. And that small blockchain part might be critical or very important, but you would need to kind of complement with a number of other things. And then if you kind of introduce this as a kind of good solution for something, you get always the question like, first of all, why do you use blockchain for that? But that you might be able to kind of argue. So you need that for that part. But then again, kind of if the blockchain forms like 10% or 15% of the overall solution, it fails to meet that expectation of being kind of super revolutionary. So it's kind of a smart technology to use for a part of it, but it's not really changing everything. And so I think that's those two things are kind of tricky in there. And then there's a third answer, which is kind of, we often encounter when we talk to kind of practitioners who were putting these systems in place. So they often themselves started with the technology. So they started to talk about blockchain, then they kind of backtracked. So this is we encountered several times. They kind of back, no, but now we're talking about technology. No, we didn't gotta go back. We got to talk about the need. We got to like we are trained to kind of talk about the actual need that it kind of first, and before we kind of jump into the blockchain technology. So many of the pilots that we looked into, while they said that they weren't actually maybe even technology projects, our technology wasn't part of it, they actually might have been technology projects where blockchain has been kind of put in as a kind of at a quite early stage as some kind of a requirement for the system. And if that's the case, yeah.
Thank you. I like these answers. Thank you.
So then, second chapter, this is more like the theoretical chapter, which we kind of, I won't go through the whole, and this is also something where we kind of where people often like to discuss few of them. So I'm just gonna pick the first one. So this kind of, and we are not saying that there wouldn't be any merit in discussing this, or that would be totally fun. But I think for the first one, for example, we list this kind of myth that public blockchains are disrupting the public sector all around the world, or even public blockchains have already disrupted public sector all around the world. So this is not the case yet, at least. So kind of, while we are seeing a lot of the pilots, and especially now after the report has been published, we've seen quite a lot of growth in this area. It's not as we could kind of treat this question of, okay, we kind of sorted out already. So it's just kind of doing it already, or maybe done it already. Then maybe the third one. There is one obvious way to apply blockchain technology in the public sector. Now that's, of course, a little bit of a simplification, because blockchain technology can be a number of things, and it can be configured in a number of different kinds of ways, and it can be used in services in a number of ways. But many would still claim that there is something common for blockchain technologies, such as, for example, the decentralized nature of the technology that really kind of is the obvious way that's kind of combines a number of the use cases. Okay, so this is kind of the things that we kind of wanted to, and this is more like a literature review or state of the art review, and it's kind of framed as these myths that we kind of try to at least discuss, if not debunk. So this is kind of the theoretical part of the report, and then chapters number 3 and 4 are more kind of empirical in a way that we looked at some specific blockchain pilots in more detail. And here, since we didn't look at all the pilots, so we made choices. So this one is always, you can always make the claim that, okay, why didn't you look at this very interesting pilot? And we have also learned that after the publication of pilot, that there were some pilots that kind of merit further kind of work. But what we wanted to do is that we wanted to, and remember, this is now 2019, 2020, we wanted to look into projects that have gathered users, that have actual users where we can get some kind of data on that usage. Not pilots or not ideas, actual users. And it was harder than we expected, actually. Like we could find limited pilots. That was not super difficult. But if you look at very kind of large user amounts, at least in 2019, 2020, it was still, there weren't so many that we could actually look at. Part of this does come back to the answer I gave on like this question of how much blockchain do you need it to have a blockchain, you know? So if the blockchain solution is very small part of the overall solution stack, then maybe kind of the users won't even know, or users are not encountering that part of the solution is actually blockchain based. So we at least tried to do some work on kind of identifying few of them, and this is kind of maybe the first one is the kind of the most important one. It's also tied in with our first chapter of the report. So actually having some kind of value proposal for it. So what does it actually do better than its competitors? What does it actually, where is it kind of only possible to use a blockchain solution for it? A number of other things also came up. I won't go through in much detail in here because much of this really depends on the context of the use case, but also on what blockchain was used and how it was deployed in more detail. And then the chapter number 4, this one was linked to OECD's other efforts to provide this kind of 6 different digital government framework areas, which their OPSI is using to kind of measure digital government maturity. And in the book, we kind of make an effort to try to combine this kind of maturity measurements to blockchain. What could it look like for emerging technologies? And I know that they have also continued this work after we have published the report. And of course, here also there is a very good question of kind of, are all emerging technologies the same? Like, should they be treated the same in terms of kind of looking into how digital is a government? If for example, one country is super evolved, for example, in AI, but not so in blockchain, like, how do you kind of measure? And those kinds of questions, of course, are a little political, but OECD kind of has means to deal with those, I guess. So this is kind of roughly kind of what we tried to, when we try to simplify what we're trying to do in the report, kind of laying out this basically 5 different things. So first, this viable, valuable, and vital. So we used basically the introduction part to drive that. Then we tried to provide the kind of state of the art of the literature on this kind of specifically unrealistic expectations related to the technology. And then on the third one and on the fourth one, we discuss kind of more like more like project-related attributes and then organizational things. And at least we hope in the summary to drive to give some ideas to how to kind of drive a successful blockchain innovation project. at least some indications of how what that could look like. And then we also kind of, these are more like what we then encountered when we kind of published this and what people had things to say about. So one has to do with this hype and kind of over ambitious, especially rampant on the cryptocurrency side of things. So maybe not so much on the public sector blockchain side. So the expectation levels of the disruption and of the digital revolution for blockchain is kind of put so high that no matter how good systems we're able to produce with blockchain, it's very difficult to ever match these expectations. So that kind of problematic is in there. I know, but also kind of just that people had that kind of already in OECD and the OECD countries and in public sectors, when looking into this technology, they have, some of it is pretty divided into camps. So you have a lot of polarization going on. And might be tricky thing to actually, that might be a tricky thing when implementing these kinds of technologies. And then you have a number of kind of research related questions, of course, in this you have encountered if you have done research in this area. So kind of comparing the merits of one particular technology against another one, especially in the situations where one or several of these is emerging. So we don't fully yet know all the kind of how it works. Lack of users, I mean, just is a problem, like for a number, like that. If you don't have that, that's kind of, at least for information systems, that's what we would like to have. But kind of course, when you have users, we've done most of the kind of interesting design decisions already. So, but that was at least for us in 2019, 2020, a rather big issue. Data access, actually a little bit unsurprisingly, since at least in Sweden, we usually have pretty good access to what public sector actors are doing. And when it comes to blockchain, we did encounter some problems in getting the kind of actual or even evidence of some of the claims that were being made. So that was something actually we hadn't really expected for a number of reasons. And then another kind of area that we did encounter quite fully is the European blockchain service infrastructure. So European Union has its own infrastructure related to blockchain, and it's quite interesting. They've done a number of really good work. So I think one of the kind of the criticism, or maybe not criticism, but comments was more like, should the OECD work be more aligned with the European blockchain service infrastructure work, or should they be kept like separate? Or should OECD look at the other of its members, like specifically US take on blockchain in the public sector, or maybe maybe interesting also look at the Chinese, especially the big blockchain pilots that they have actually ongoing there. I've also listed a number of kind of future work, and this is kind of listed also in the report. So kind of specifically this question of public sector versus private sector. So a number of the blockchain implementations that we are seeing, a lot of the development, for example, happens in the startups or in small software companies that are more on the private sector side. And then in the public sector side, you have big public sector actors, such as kind of agencies or big municipalities trying as kind of customers for those blockchain solutions. And then, of course, maybe the cryptocurrencies was the one kind of quite interesting. So there's a lot of things happening in there, a lot of development, also a lot of like development that I don't maybe like so much, but there's definitely kind of buzz and development and technological advancement there. So how could that be transferred to the public sector side? Or is there a need, or would it be more kind of appropriate, as many public sector officials these days are saying that they don't actually even like to go to that crypto discussion a lot. They will say that our blockchain is a little bit different and a little bit something else. There's other question related to public platforms versus private platforms. This has especially kind of emerged from the Ethereum discussions around Web 2.0 and Web 3.0, where the kind of the blockchain is kind of intended as some kind of infrastructural backbone for a number of things. But what's the public sector role in that? It's kind of one of the, at least for me, a little bit unclear situation. Then the question of kind of just disintermediating government and a kind of this kind of logic of government that was pretty prevalent in the OECD, where kind of government got its kind of mandate in elections every few years, and then blockchain had a very different idea of how the mandate is kind of gotten, and how do the actual implementers kind of see this, or do they see it as there's some kind of tension, or is it more like blockchain is a technology with its benefits and drawbacks, and we try to choose the optimal system to deliver some kind of public benefit or more efficient process, and how do they see that? And then and then this kind of a question that I think it's super interesting from policy perspective. So what to prioritize? Do we play it safe, like relatively small scale tracking, logging, kind of a workflow management, or tracking where the workflow is, like safe consortium blockchains? Or do we go for the more decentralized, more disruptive, risky use cases, such as I'd say voting, but maybe not that risky, maybe something else that's a kind of in there. And then I listed a number of the use cases, and there's a lot more in the kind of in the report of the specifics of the use cases. I didn't pick any Finnish ones for this one, but I could have. Let me stop the kind of the lecture part here, and we can take some of the questions or comments or interventions or however you like. We have one comment from the back.
Do you think the government will take a second? Do you think the governments will accept blockchain in the upcoming future?
But do you mean accept?
Like I have seen there is a huge, like whenever the topic of blockchain arises, governments don't want to progress with it further because they feel it's going to just impact something in the economy. So
yeah, I think there's two. So I don't think, first of all, there's this, so the part of that has to do with more like cryptocurrencies, like restricting technologies at all, like, and that might, that I could see that there would be a need to kind of regulate some of the like wilder technologies, for sure. I see that. For the public sector side, I do think that there are specific areas where they will push forward for use cases. And maybe to name a few, I think the identity area use cases is one where we will see more development, for sure, for different governments. And I don't know how European Union or separate national governments or how it's gonna. And I think that is super interesting. I think there will be development. Another area where we have actually a little bit, to my surprise, credentials and different kinds of university credentials have been a usage area where we've seen a lot of pilots basically already on the public sector side. And that's also an area that I kind of discussed a little bit in the report. There, I think the main problem is really the business model or the users of it. It's relatively straightforward for the university to do this kind of complementary launch of the credential. The really kind of interesting or the really tricky part is kind of who's using them and what's the value in kind of in getting that third-party usage and data on that third-party usage. I think that's another area where we will see development. And then in general, I think a number of bureaucratic processes would benefit from some kind of more kind of workflow tracking. So on decisions or on memorandums, on agendas, on a number of those kinds of things. Those three areas that I can quite easily see. Then there's a fourth one, which is a little more tricky, the notarization or the removing of some of the government agencies from the picture. I think that's a little bit riskier. But I do think that in some specific use areas, we will see these systems. Whether they will match the level of expectations raised for them, I don't know. I think that is hard. So let's see.
Thank you so much.
Do we have any questions from the chat? can't see them.
I could ask something.
Well, could you?
Yes. Thank you, Juho, for the interesting presentation. It was very inspiring. And I find it really interesting, this point where there are different pilot cases and you could actually discuss them, but then there isn't concrete users or use cases to reflect on. And I have followed what you said, that this is from the old ages of 2019 and 2020, but after the publication of the report, can you give us a specific case of where the technology has been implemented and there are actual users, and what those, let's say, experiences have been?
Yeah, very good question. I have a few in my mind. So, in the Stronghouse project, in one of the other projects that I mentioned, region of Trent in the Netherlands has released a kind of local currency. Or maybe it's not really a local currency. It's like a local voucher scheme for energy renovations. So what they basically did is that they airdropped coins to everybody in a specific area, and that you could only use to use in a hardware store to kind of make green renovations. So they kind of dropped vouchers and they used the energy kind of smart meters to kind of track. So every household got that voucher, and that was used there. You could they run it on blockchain, and I think they have like 20,000 users. So blockchain was used as a part of the infrastructure. So that would be a kind of just one example. I can think of a few others where we have seen kind of at least limited pilots that have been able to gather hundreds of users. But if you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands, then I think it's a smaller number of pilots that I can at least immediately think of. So that would be one example that I was thinking about. There was another one in Sweden where they did a so it was kind of a unemployment agency kind of wallet experiment where you could kind of where the unemployment agency, it was kind of just one data point that they were verified whether this person is a job seeker or not, and but I think with that even they got into thousands of users, but even then kind of looking into more users than that seemed, at least for them, tricky, at least at that point that when we were looking at it. So what they kind of, and I was kind of super keen on kind of looking more into that data, but with that we actually encountered the problem that it wasn't the unemployment agency who was actually running the infrastructure, but it was the social insurance company that was running the infrastructure, and they were not so super keen on letting us maybe poke around with the data. So because it's a private company, so that there we run into a data question. It's not the only data question that we kind of have run over 3 years and trying to actually kind of go a little bit deeper into finding those data. But much of the empirical work that we carried out is getting a little bit dated. So if you have companies or data sets that I could have a look at, I'm super interested to talk more. Thanks.
Thank you. There is another question in the chat. How did the frameworks differ between US, China, and EU?
How did the
frameworks differ between US, China, and EU? I believe this refers to your slide.
Yeah. So I think, well, in general, if you look at the approaches that I think it's like 3 different models. So US has been super kind of company driven, especially there, these huge internet companies have had a huge role in kind of running this ecosystem things. China has had very state driven blockchain approach, I would say. And I don't know how much I can say about this, but at least this was one of the areas where OECD was super interested to learn more exactly on what are the Chinese pilots and what is happening inside those pilots, but which was very tricky to kind of research, at least in the times of pandemic. So there might be one area where future kind of research would be needed, or actually ACM had a kind of a specific article coming out last year about the Chinese public sector blockchain that had like incredibly big numbers on some of the users and on the pilots. And I would be super interested to kind of going a little bit into those numbers, like what is behind there. And then European Union has moved with their kind of EBSI blockchain infrastructure. So that would be the kind of maybe the third way, somewhere between these two approaches, I guess. That's what I meant with the frameworks.
There's a question from Taya, and I let her ask next. I will steal the moment because I want some help. I'm giving Juho a lecture next week, or talk to public sector companies or people. And I would like to say something like regards from you. What should I say in your presentation? What is the key takeaway that I should take? Should I give them a blockchain lecture?
No.
Thank you. but what is the thing that you see that is the most critical from perhaps the report or what you are doing now? And then I will let Taya ask the next question.
It's a very good question. Maybe one is to talk a little bit with this on polarization and hype. So give all technologies and also this technology a chance, you know, so maybe that would be kind of one. So there is a kind of a lot of overblown expectations, a lot of like people are saying things that are wrong, but that doesn't mean that the technology should, you know, automatically be discounted, and kind of making them aware that there is a lot of different opinions. And I don't know, is this good thing to say, because the public officials might I don't know who's gonna, if somebody gonna say bad things about it, but I think that would be important somehow, you know, get that message across that this is a technology that has its users. Give it a chance, maybe. That's the starting point.
And the thing is that there are so many technologies that are in a way trying to steal the airwave of the decision makers. And so perhaps kind of the issue is to stay cool with this kind of these buzzwords that are flying, and try to understand what is the kind of the key. And I think that somewhere you had this, that should we go with technology first, or should we actually understand the user needs? Mm-hmm. And somehow I'm leaning to the latter. Mm-hmm. We should understand kind of the needs and use if the blockchain is the right hammer, let's use it.
Yeah, I agree. That's it. So some have said that exactly kind of the other version of so the blockchain seems to be the hammer that you use for everything, and that of course doesn't work. But that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be some cases where you could use it. And I think this, I don't know, is it too early to talk about specific use cases? But for example, this related to identity or kind of some kind of public workflow queuing, number of those systems. I think it's pretty apparent how they could be of benefit also to public sector, but it might not be that it's revolutionized the whole public sector. Those kinds of solutions might look a little bit different than some of the more conservative.
Let's go to Taya's question. Taya, do you want to read it, or should I use my rally English and say it?
Yeah, I can also use my rally English. Thank you, Juho. It was very great presentation and thought-provoking. I was left thinking that what's your own area of interest in the future research? So you have mentioned now identity a few times, but what would be something something beyond identity or after identity that you would want to look into?
Thank you. It's a great question. So as you indicated, so that's what we're working with Gabriel. Identity area is kind of one that that we will for sure do something. I would be kind of another area that I would that I kind of feel that would need a little more attention has to do with these existing Chinese blockchain pilots, but I don't really know how to do that research. But I mean, I would be interested in looking that into a little more detail. So that would be an other area. And then maybe a third one. So there is a kind of ongoing research streams around ambitions and hype, and how those ambitions and hype are used to make emerging technology more attractive. So that might be another area where I could do some work. But I think the problem currently is that we have gathered quite a lot of data as a part of the report and as a kind of follow up on the report. So it's kind of I'm now maybe primarily working with those data sets rather than looking into new ones. But identity is definitely one, and I also think that's one where Finland is quite advanced. So it's interesting also from University of Gothenburg's perspective to learn more about that. What can we do in a more kind of a Nordic environment or Scandinavian environment.
Thank you very much, Juho, for the interesting presentations. Are there any other questions from the Zoom team or here in the startup lab? Maha has a question, just a moment.
I have a question. What do you think about the opinion saying that there will be an expansion in utilizing blockchain technology in like digital identities, considering the investment to change the infrastructure for like public sector or private companies and the cybersecurity issues on blockchain?
Yeah, so actually that's one of the, we don't really touch cybersecurity almost at all in the report. So that was kind of, we a little bit touched upon on the project part. And the reason is that when we were talking with many of the practitioners, they didn't raise it. So that doesn't, of course, mean that it wouldn't be a concern. Maybe it's an indication exactly to the other direction. But that was the reason why we didn't really look into much detail into that. And many of also of the cybersecurity things, because so if you go back, like blockchain, different kinds of blockchain technologies have had a lot of impact from the cybersecurity area. A lot of researchers working in the area have kind of pointed out a number of things, and also even the kind of, I'm thinking like this Satoshi and kind of a lot of the ideas that kind of have been derived. So a lot of the ideas have to do with this kind of technical trust and things related to that, and that is drawing often on different kinds of cybersecurity areas. So that's kind of one thing. So there is a little bit of kind of history with that, but also when we look at the specific implications, the cybersecurity challenges might be different for different use cases. And you mentioned one for identity, which I think is quite interesting. So in the report, we touch another one which has to do with the US complementary phone app voting system called Votes, which was used actually in the, or was tested in the preliminaries for the US presidential election, but not in the actual election. And it was a phone app, the voting that was kind of intended for complementary voting. So US service members abroad could use that to kind of have a complementary voting system. And this was kind of really interesting to kind of actually see from, because I was at Massachusetts at the time when they were kind of having this discussion, and many of the MIT cybersecurity research, as well as Harvard and a few of the other areas, really pointed out that this is not safe what you're doing with the votes application. And there's a kind of large discussion around that particular theme. And in hindsight, I could also say that, and that also kind of happened like at the times of this report, it is probably a good thing that Votes complementary voting system was not piloted in the US presidential election, because the legitimacy of the election is already kind of was contested by one of the persons who was running for it. So I think adding some kind of technology that's not fully tested to that mix would have been probably a really bad idea.
So you have spent some time in Harvard, and we are very amazed about that. So say something about the visit. Should we all go there, or should we forget this small college in the place called US?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to share my experiences with those visits. And I'm kind of I can't, of course, maybe I can say something, but I mean, if you want to discuss this further, I'm also kind of keen on giving you more input on how to think about it.
So maybe you give just a highlight of the experience, and we can continue.
Some of the intellectual encounters were like super good. On one hand, maybe second is my kind of own career. I got tenured when I was there, so I had probably had a direct impact to that. And a third one, this project was to a large extent related to not only that I was kind of looking at the blockchain and public sector, but also had this affiliation that I could kind of collect it with. So I think there's several benefits, but maybe if like from personal experience, just encountering and have kind of been able to discuss a few in different fields around governance and blockchain, I think for me it was super interesting. So in general, I would recommend people to go abroad no matter kind of where, but of course choosing the place is important. And that visit was organized through SCANCOR, so Scandinavian Consortium of Organizational Studies, where I'm not sure how it exactly works in Finland. I remember, I'm not sure, but in Sweden at least all the universities are members and can thus apply for it. I'm happy to tell a lot more about that if you're interested in going on giving information on SCANCOR or whatnot. So don't hesitate to reach out. I have good tips.
Thank you very much, Juho, for this super interesting discussion related to public governance, public blockchain projects. I have only one question. Do you know how many projects are still in production? Because you were speaking about pilots only, but do you have a number?
Yeah, number. I have quite good understanding of what is happening, I think at least in the Swedish public sector, and that's like the ones that have actual users that have some kind of production systems it's definitely under 5. Well, a few of the most well-known, for example, the Lantmäteriet, even though they were able to kind of conduct transactions and get some actual users, I would still kind of think that as primarily a pilot. There's other big one that they used to have in the Riksbanken, the central bank, but that kind of pivoted away from blockchain into, I think there is still blockchain component, so maybe that could be looked at. And then there's a number of other ones that have kind of for example, the one that I raised here, the unemployment insurance. I would say even though they had hundreds of users, for me it seemed more like still a pilot than something that they would actually be rolling out on a larger scale. And then they have the quite publicized Bolagsverket that I'm not sure what they say it's in production. I would say it's not yet, kind of, at least not fully. So if that's the Swedish like under 5 public sector, I would guess that it's roughly similar for many of the other countries on the public sector.
Thank you very much. I think this just shows that there are many other research directions that could be taken by researchers as well. So yeah. Thank you. If there are no more questions, Teemu has.
So thanks. I have a question. The leftist in me is quite worried that it seems that every public sector blockchain thing is about exerting control to the citizens. So like I've mentioned, unemployment is about tracking people, but is there any kind of public projects that aim to provide more liberties? Like, well, if the blockchain provides anonymity, is there any project looking into that, or like government accountability or anything?
A very good question. I'm thinking of the ongoing. If we talk about the unemployment, so that I think so. Yeah, there is this control element to it. On the other hand, kind of that's how the whole kind of social security system is built in the Nordic countries. So how the system would work without the digital solution is that you have to go several times a week to a specific agency, and then you get something stamped, you take that to another agency, you get a stamp there, and then you take it back to the first agency. So kind of, I don't know, is it kind of liberating in this sense, but at least kind of this efficiency kind of does help the one who doesn't have to, use a lot of their kind of private time to kind of claim that benefit. So I think that might be the case in a number of them. But of course, if you're only, but that's really, I need to think about that really. So for example, this, I'm thinking like the energy knip now, the airdropping of vouchers to everybody in a specific area that they could use in a hardware store. I think that, but of course there is a logic to that. So there is a kind of direction. You're not allowed to do anything you want with that investment. It kind of works only on hardware store, and you can only use it for green renovation kind of related stuff, unless you break the rules. But at least that's the logic. But maybe it would still follow this kind of control logic. Let me get back to you on that. It's a good question, because it's not obvious that this would be the case for those public sector projects. There's a large part of research around blockchain that looks into more deliberative ways to kind of build this system, but also use this system. There's a lot of research on kind of making some kind of better election systems, or a number of those kinds of things. There's some blockchains for management of companies that would move the annual general meeting to some kind of coin-based, so kind of basically taking power away from the running managers and giving it to the kind of shareholders. So there's a number of kind of areas where you could see that this kind of logic. But it's a good question. I need to think about that. Very good.
Thank you very much. I believe there are no more questions from the Zoom team.
Yeah, so if that's the case, I want to thank you for the opportunity to kind of present my work. If there's any questions or you want to kind of continue discussing, I'm here. I'm kind of happy to talk about anything related to this, or give you tips on anything else you might want to hear. So thank you for everybody here, and thank you for everybody in Zoom.